In the past, I've set out to accomplish many different kinds of Genshin challenges. Though the path that was walked in long and arduous, I usually completed the challenges I set for myself. This isn't one of those kinds of stories. But I'm putting the cart before the horse. To understand my English cries, we have to go back several months ago, when this challenge was first introduced to me. For several years now, Saluna, the fellow Genshin content creator, has been maintaining and building up a Polearms only account. Out of all the endgame content, the main challenge he hasn't been able to overcome was dire difficulty on Stygian Onslaught. However, for the 6.1 cycle of the mode, it seemed like it would be possible to complete. 2 out of the 3 bosses were already defeated by the time I got my hands on the account. There was only the Fatui standing in the way. But no matter how much effort Saluna put in, he wasn't able to get close enough to defeating this boss with the only available team left to do so, Raiden Overload. Despite these failures, he believed that it was possible for someone to be able to do it, to have the skills to get the job done. And so he reached out to multiple other creators to see who would be willing to take on the challenge. And this is where my dumbass comes in and realizes what I walked into. Let's talk about the Fatui itself. Upon the start of the fight, she activates a white shield. While this isn't a vape or melt team, the shield really cuts into the damage of Raiden Overload overall. The reason for it being the following. Raiden's skill can't proc on shields, which is instantly 20 to 30k DPS loss. And all the particles the skill would produce are completely gone. On top of this, Night Soul Burst can't be activated while this white shield is up, making the 2-piece effect of Scroll unusable for a good portion of the fight. And, oh yeah, did I mention that Fab weapons can't be activated on the shield either? 2 words. Energy Nightmare. Especially with Raiden having the highest burst energy cost in the entire game. Outside of this Fatui boss has some of the most dynamic and fast attack patterns out of any enemy in the game. So fast that the game has a hard time properly registering when and where the hurt box for its attacks are actually located. Brother. As you can see, it's particularly this third attack during the shield transition phase that has a completely inaccurate hitbox, to the point where you can get hit before the attack has even launched. Absolutely ridiculous. The boss also applies cryo on all of its attacks, and corrosion on the 3 attacks it does when it first gains its shield, or subsequent shields, making it so that if you get hit, all animations will be slowed, and or you die a slow and painful death from the corrosion effect. Oh yeah, by the way, did I mention that Raiden can whiff her ult? So with all these issues, was it even possible to make a reasonable attempt, let alone defeat this enemy? I was about to find out. I pretty much went into the deep end with this one. I hadn't finished Stygian on my account at this point, and most people are just cheesing this boss with some combination of Zhongli, GOMC, Jean, particularly Jean, Sijuin, Kaching, and Mona. Something that wasn't possible for this account given its weapon restriction. As a result, there's pretty much no information or good references for figuring out how to clear this enemy in, well, an actual clear. In my first session, I spent around 4 hours trying to produce a clear, and it was just failure after failure without end. So Unga Boonga didn't work. Kinda expected, to be honest. There were multiple problems I felt. So let's start with the first one, which is the Fab weapon argument. Even though Fab weapons can help the starting rotation a bit, that's all it does. It also limits what you can do for the first rotation, since the Fab user effectively has to be the first on field to deal damage in time before the white shield comes up. As a result, I wanted to drop Fab weapons if possible. To do that, I had to craft a setup that would be able to get enough energy to make up for the missing 6 initial energy that Fab weapons would be able to produce. Second of all, I needed to figure out what damage windows I had. Even though only the first 3 attacks from the shield transition phase apply permanent corrosion, again, all attacks apply the cryo slow effect, which would actively hinder the amount of damage Raiden could output. There was also the issue of this boss being able to outright juke my attacks and stagger me with a simple breath. Finally, third, I had to get better at Raiden combos, or at the very least, figure out which combos worked where and when. Getting the necessary information in these three categories would prove essential to getting this clear, if it were at all possible. So let's tackle the first issue first. Obviously, having fab weapons would make the initial setup easier. That's kind of what they do, right? The Stygian in of itself is a Favonius weapon propaganda machine. But it only really helps the first rotation, as I mentioned before, because once you have Raiden's ult up, I mean, you're chilling. You're getting so much energy from her attacking the enemy that you don't even need to worry about energy later on. At least you shouldn't. The fact that the second rotation itself could function without access to fab particles perfectly fine indicated to me that there was likely a setup that could work where no fab weapons were used. Out of all the skills that generate particles, the most finicky for this particular enemy was Guoba. Given the Fatui's propensity to do the same 3 attack chain that involved significant movement, Guoba has a hard time in general hitting the enemy. The key to making it so that Guoba could actually hit a majority of their breaths was dropping it just behind the Fatui. You see, when Xiangling deploys the Stove God, they land a short distance away from where Xiangling is standing. I use this to my advantage. Positioning Xiangling right in front of the Fatui causes Guoba to drop just behind the agent. This means as I walk away from the boss, as it does its scripted 3 attack chain, Guoba is able to hit them the entire time, only missing 1 breath at the end due to timing constraints. This made my starting rotation, Raiden E, Beverus hold E, Xiangling E, Eon-san E, swap to Raiden to collect particles, work exceptionally well. This particular setup completely eliminates the need for fab weapons at all, and gives so much energy that you don't even need to funnel Beverus's hold E to Xiangling when starting the first real rotation later. Not only that, I don't even lose time relative to rotations with Fav, as you still have to wait for cooldowns on everyone's skills regardless. Dropping Fav meant that I could slightly improve builds, putting a Jade Spear on Eon-san and Escaffier's signature on Chevreuse. With the initial rotation plan done, the next thing to do was investigate the attack patterns of this enemy. Due to the issues some attack patterns posed for Raiden getting hits with her initial burst slash, on top of needing to avoid the crowd aura as much as possible, I needed to understand the timings and decisions behind the Fatui's attacks. Over hours of observation, testing, and repetition to ensure the things I was seeing weren't RNG based, I came to a conclusion. For the most part, every attack the boss does can be predicted at least 2 to 3 seconds in advance. Aside from the one case where I couldn't figure out the trigger condition, and hence can't confirm whether or not the decision is actually RNG, every attack pattern this boss has is scripted, or at the very least, predictable. First of all, the first 3 attacks it does after the shield going up are guaranteed, regardless of what you do. Afterwards, it becomes a range check calculation. If you're in melee range, which in my experience is less than a full dash away from the boss, it will do 2 slashes into a flourish. After the flourish pattern finishes, there are 5 total routes for what it can do after, completely dependent on the distance between the player and the boss. If you're long range, which I'm defining as more than 2 dashes or so away from the boss will do nothing, and slow walk to your current position. If you are in mid-range, which I'm defining as 1 to 2 full dashes in terms of distance, the Fatui will dash over to you and do a follow-up attack. This follow-up attack can either be a dash or circular slash, which is dependent on whether or not you're in mid-range for the dash or melee range for the circular slash. Finally, if you stayed in melee range, the Fatui will do an uppercut slash, which is followed by either a dash or circular slash, again dependent on whether or not you are in mid-range or melee range. In case you're wondering what happens if you aren't in melee range to trigger the 2 slashes into a flourish, the Fatui either slow walks to you in the case of you being in long range, or dashes towards you in the case of mid-range, and then the same distance calculation is done to determine the next pattern. As you can see, this boss is completely predictable in terms of what attack it will do next, and I've pretty much mapped out the first 20 seconds or so in its entirety. This is the entire decision tree. After this, the attack pattern decision tree effectively resets. There is one other melee pattern I haven't mentioned yet where the boss does a circular slash into a double slash flourish combination. Another variation of this is where it only does the circular slash. These attack patterns are heavily discouraged for the Fatui to use and only uses them if the double slash flourish attack pattern is on cooldown initially from what I can tell. I couldn't quite figure out the activation conditions for these particular patterns, as there wasn't a clear line of logic that I saw when analyzing this enemy. This is the one case I mentioned earlier. Outside of this, there was also the guaranteed 3 attack pattern after the Fatui puts a shield up. By far, the most problematic of these 3 attacks was the last one. As I mentioned earlier, this attack is so fast, the server is seemingly unable to accurately tell where the hurt box should be located at all times, making the attack hit earlier and later than the animation would suggest, sometimes to almost full second delays. However, I had to adapt to this since the second shield phase timing would require me to deal continuous damage with Raiden during this 3 attack pattern sequence. And to do that, I would need to be more proficient with Raiden combos. Now, the only real combo I've done previously with Raiden was 5N1C, which isn't considered the best combo pattern for Raiden. It's not even close, by the way. Most of our better patterns include using N3C, which I did test. The main issue with this is that there are very few windows where N3C makes sense to use in this particular boss. On top of this, it makes Raiden more vulnerable to interruption, so this, on top of the fact that I wasn't used to doing it, made me eventually drop trying to use N3C altogether. However, what I hadn't anticipated was what was listed as the best combo for Raiden. As it turns out, there was someone that had actively Dragon Striked with Raiden in the past, doing a combo of 4 and 1 CP. I had tried on multiple occasions to try and do this, and couldn't manage anything above a 10% success rate, and that was with only doing 1 and 1 CP and not the full combo. Given I only had about a week to try and do this clear, I thought there were better uses of my time than chase plunges. Still, I kept it in the back of my mind. In the end, rather than try to learn and get good at a new combo within a week, I decided to double down on what I knew. Since I already committed to the N1C route, the main point of contention was trying to figure out when I could actually attack, particularly during the second shield phase transition, as I had to continuously deal damage during this transition, unlike the first shield phase. After extensive testing, I found out 2 major things. One, I could weave N1Cs between first 2 attack patterns and before the third one as the Fatui charges up for the final attack. Additionally, I could fully dodge after the N1C, avoiding all debuff effects. And 2, I couldn't do a full N1C in the third attack pattern window. The attack just comes out too quickly and has an absurd range. However, you can cancel N1C early, and you can see when you dash cancel Raiden, if you do it too early for N1C, you end up canceling half of your charge attack damage, reducing your overall DPS significantly. It's not ideal, but it was better than getting no damage at all during the shield phase. Still, the timing was very specific, to the point where sometimes I just had to hold back dealing damage during the third pattern if it was too close. Another thing I had to adjust to was not dash canceling while doing N1C during certain phases. Stamina management is very important during all of this, and so I made sure I could do 5 N1C consistently without dash canceling, something I hadn't done much of before since I always dash canceled with her previously. At this point, I had covered all the issues that I had initially encountered. However, more issues had cropped up, and there wasn't much to do to address them. Even with all the optimizations I mentioned earlier, it was difficult to pull off a run in practice, mainly because if I wanted to be able to clear, I have to be greedy with the damage windows. If you assume an average amount of crits, or the expected number of crits that Raiden will do, I was lacking around 2 to 3 million damage with this team, and that was including the effects of the White Shield, which would make this Fatui really breakpointy with the amount I could do. While multiple build improvements did happen over the course of my attempts, crit fishing was necessary. And it wasn't just the Raiden burst that had to crit, it was pretty much every attack. Outside of the White Shield phases, getting every strike to crit was imperative. Attempts that weren't able to do that were resets. There were so many different failure points for this run. Around a couple days in to this challenge, I could consistently get past the second White Shield phase, but eliminating that last smidgen of HP was an insurmountable wall. There was one last thing I hadn't tried in earnest, which was plunging. Previously, I had tried to Dragon Strike and it hadn't gone so well. I think I could maybe do it 10% of the time once, so getting consecutive N1 charge plunges did not seem possible for me. So I went back to basics. Normally, you get plunges simply by jumping off a higher ledge. Could I possibly use that in Stygian? For 2 out of the 3 possible arena variations, the entire ground is pretty much flat. However, the Fontaine Arena has these pedestals that are slightly elevated above the ground. And so I tested what I could do. And as you just saw, it's possible for me to do N1CP for N1C, which was markedly better than what I was doing before. There was also the added bonus to gain more Night Soul points for Yeon-san due to her buff being based on movement. The main issue with this strategy is getting the Fatui to position close enough to the pedestal. It's not that doable outside of the first 30 seconds or so due to her tendency of slowly walking backwards and Raiden's lunge effect when doing her first normal attack. It was even hard to get off to begin with. I couldn't manage to have her position towards the pedestals later in the fight due to her getting caught on arena borders and variable dash range. Maybe at some point I'll try to actually learn Dragon Strike on Raiden. Maybe a future video? I don't know. Let me know down below if that would interest all of you. Developing and figuring out these strats over time gave me a pretty good picture of what the necessary damage timeline was. So with my initial setup locked in from previously, I should be able to gather enough energy by the 140 mark, starting my first rotation. Raiden's ult should be pressed by 134, and rotations will be about 20 seconds with plus or minus 1 second for swap timers and energy funneling. So I'll have about 5 rotations worth of damage output for the entire run. The Fatui shield should go down by the time the second Raiden ultimate burst slash comes out, which is around the 110 mark, depending on RNG crits. The shield will be back up by the time the timer is at the 51 second mark, and it's imperative that the third Raiden burst slash goes into the white shield and doesn't damage the Fatui instead, since getting down the shield is the main priority. Assuming proper play, the white shield will go down a second time before a rotation has passed. And, well, if all goes well, the next rotation should finish things. However, with attempt after attempt slowly eroding away whatever time I had left to actively attempt this run, I soon no longer had any time left. With my back against the wall, that was the Stygian reset. I only had 6 hours left to do this run, with me only finishing my own Stygian several minutes prior. Time for one last effort. It was either I get the run, or I go until the reset, whichever came first. Several hours in, this happened. That was the closest I had gone to beating the Fatui that night. The rest of my attempts could get somewhat close, but with how crit reliant this run is, and with Raiden having 77% crit rate, all I could do was fight against the inevitable. I have a lot of mixed feelings about that run in particular overall. Yes, I Definitely made mistakes that could have been prevented, leading to a clear, with most of them being painfully listed on screen. However, this Fatui also had some BS with its self-damage mechanics. Whenever it triggers its white shield, the Fatui is supposed to take around 5% of its total HP, which you can see when the first and second shield are triggered. I had gotten the Fatui's health down so low that this self-damage didn't trigger the full amount, or, well, didn't trigger the second proc. Technically, the Fatui has 2 instances of HP drain, but that's neither here nor there. Overall, it left me with a cocktail of emotions. Disappointment at my own gameplay and ire towards who coded the self-HP drain. Regardless, one thing was clear. I had failed in my goal of beating the Fatui. Sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. I wasn't good enough. Honestly, this wasn't supposed to be a video, since I hadn't managed to clear, but I was convinced by others that it would make a worthwhile experience, which is why this video now exists. Hopefully you enjoyed it, despite the lackluster result. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to watch an interesting Spiral Abyss video, I and 5 other creators did an interesting Abyss compilation video, which you can watch from the end screen, which should be shown now. See you next time.